Now, the program to help you and your family get fit and stay fit with a biblical foundation without a one-size-fits-all plan. It's Faith Family Fitness with your host, Full Armor Sports and national champion coach, Jason Lupo.
Welcome to Faith Family Fitness Freedom on 100.7 The Word. We're continuing. This is our last week on this conversation of biblical manhood and kind of the crisis affecting our men in this country. And so today we are looking at what should the church response be to this kind of crisis that's unfolding, that's leading to a variety of other issues with fatherlessness in the household and high divorce rates and just the destruction of the traditional nuclear family and traditional family values. And so we know that through the course of this conversation that we've had over the last 5-6 weeks, that it is extremely important that we define what a man is, but also have the conversation about what it means to be a man, and then how do we get there with our own kids, with kids that are coming up in future generations? How do we make that impact? How do we change this culture for the better to put men back into the culture? And so that's the conversation that we're going to have today. I'm joined here with Aaron Lujan, who's co-hosting my show with me.
What's happening, brother?
Well, you know, we're just going to have some fun today, and I'm back. I'm back in town. I'm no longer in St. George, Utah, so I get to be in the studio with Aaron, which is definitely, I think, an easier situation than trying to call into a show. But it was fun nonetheless to call into the show last week.
I'm excited about today because this is the truth. This is the answer to the question, what is a man? And if I can just jump in, I think that there's 3 biblical descriptors of what a man is. Number 1, he's a leader. A man is a provider, and a man is a protector. In the early church, they called the people that followed Jesus Christians, little Christ. And that was because the people reflected who Jesus was in nature, how they responded, how they lived their lives. Jesus was a male. So I think if we're going to look at scripture, look at the biblical definition of manhood, we must look at Jesus. And I think it's great for men to have Jesus as a male because he personifies exactly what a man is supposed to look like. When I look at Jesus, when I think about Jesus, I see quiet strength. I see self-control. I see obedience up to the cross, bold, but yet loving. And I think that men need to look to scripture for that biblical definition of manhood. Would you agree?
I would 100% agree. I think that we've tried to complicate a lot of this in a lot of different ways. And I think when we talked about that kind of alt-right ideology that we talked about last week, where we have so many people trying to pick up the slack for the church and define and culture what a man is kind of that idea of, hey, we're complicating this. We're getting away from the core of what it is that Christ wanted in our lives. And I think ultimately at the end of the day, that's the question we always have to go back to is this what God's intention was or is for my life?
Absolutely. And, we talk about leadership, in Ephesians 5:25, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So as a leader, this is not a tyrannical leader. This is a leader who leads with love. This is a leader who the people in his family want to follow. They feel safe. They feel protected. And I think in contrast to the definition that the alt-right, the red pill movement is making, is that there's this tyrannical leadership. There's this machismo. There's this force that's taking place. And I think God gave men strength, but that strength, the purpose of that strength is for protection, to defend goodness from evil. And that's where I think the culture got it wrong in the red pill movement.
Yeah, 100%. I think that ultimately at the end of the day, right, we've gone down this path for so long, and we've now had hours of conversation on this topic. And the question, I think, really gets to, okay, now we've defined it. We know what it is. we kind of know how we got to this point of being torn down as men and toxic masculinity and the feminist movement and all this other stuff. And now we've even talked about the alt-right response to this situation. And now the question is, where does the church fit into this? Where does the church go from here? Where do we as Christians decide to go from here? How do we take on this next step in solving this masculinity crisis?
I don't think there's this special unknown solution or answer. I mean, the call for the last 2,000 years has been take up your cross and follow me. Follow Jesus. Simple idea, a little bit more difficult in practice, right? So, I mean, we could spend the next, couple months talking about Jesus, but I think for the purposes of this show, we need to boil down from a perspective of manhood, how was Jesus living out that call as a man? And I think it goes back to the leadership, the protection, and the provision. I think that at the end of the day, the culture desperately needs men to be leaders. We were made in the image of our Creator, Genesis 1:27. So God created man in his own image. God is provider. Therefore, we as men must provide. We must work. The other verse that I look at is Genesis 2:15. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. And in Genesis 2:24, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Partnering with women, creating family, going back to this traditional family idea. And I think, to answer your question, maybe in more practical terms, is the church needs to be on the forefront of promoting these ideas. I think that the church does a really good job in a lot of different areas, but one of the areas they're lacking is building up men and answering this question of what a man is.
So do you think it goes back to that basic idea of discipleship? I mean, the disciples who were under Jesus's realm were not like, they didn't just be these perfect men from the get-go, and some of them never got there, right? But there was a shaping, a molding that took place. And Paul did the same thing with those that were kind of under Paul's
like Timothy
purview, like Timothy. And so we know that it's not just a very simple, like, hey, go follow Jesus, because half these guys didn't know what it meant to follow Jesus at that point either.
Sure.
And so is it enough? Like, are we doing enough to where we go, hey, guess what? We have a men's Bible breakfast every, once a week or once a month. That's not really enough to help disciple men in the church to continue to follow Christ. Like, how do we change that? How do we really go and make disciples of the world? Because what we're currently doing, I don't believe is working.
I agree with you. I think what you're touching on is the more tactical response, right? The more practical response. How do we do it? I'm currently reading Natalie Runyon's book, Raised to Stay. She actually happens to be a friend of mine from New Life. Love Natalie. If you're not reading the book, read it. But she does talk about that relationship between Timothy and Paul. And she says, find your Paul and be willing to humble yourself under trustworthy men who have logged miles with the Lord and have fruit to bear. And so I think the message here, to answer your question tactically, is if you're a young man, find your Paul. If you're a Paul, find your Timothy. We need relationships in church. We need godly, masculine relationships. I need it. I found Jesus through a man that was 10 years my senior. He got my attention because he was a successful entrepreneur. And I was looking at the fruit of his life. I saw the peace that he had. And he led me to the Lord, and he was instructing me to read my Proverbs in the morning and my Romans after that. And he was answering my questions, and he was walking with me. And I don't know if I do know. I wouldn't be here in front of you today if I didn't have that Paul in my life. So again, if you're a young man, find your Paul. If you're an older gentleman with fruit that you're bearing, find your Timothy. And I think what we need to have in the church is a revival of masculine, godly relationships.
100%. I think that a lot of this is relational, and I don't think we've done enough of it. And I would even question whether or not, we don't have enough Pauls in the world.
No.
Like, we need to start by really at the, forefront of let's rethink this. Let's find some good men, disciple them up so that they can go out and disciple those that are, coming up behind them.
Yes.
And that's what the model is that we showed. And we got so far away from that we're very far removed from, I think, where the church should be.
Absolutely. And I think you nailed it right on the head, Jason. It's relational. We need to be a relational church. There's so much social media in between the church and the congregants. I mean, after COVID we're going to watch church on TV and, we're going to go find God in the mountains and all this. Jesus had 12 dudes that were on a boat. They were cooking. They were hanging out. They're smelling each other's stank. I'm joking here, but this is what discipleship looks like. It's, for example, me every Tuesday, Luke Velicone, go to Save the Storks, and we sit in chairs on the third floor and we talk about Jesus and we open up the Bible. And then when we have a moment of weakness, we're texting those other men. Or when we have a question about our faith that we're wrestling with, those are the men that we're going to. And that's what it looks like. It's just a relationship with other believers. Timothy's and Paul's.
100%. Luke's a phenomenal guy. I've known him for years. Shout out, Luke.
Big Luke.
Look, hopefully you're listening to the show, Luke. But maybe we need to get you on the show here. I'll give you a call. We'll get you on. But anyways, 100%. I think that there's some ministries that are doing it really well, mm-hmm. and that are bringing men together to do life together.
Yes.
In whatever respect that might look like. But there's still a lot more room for more growth. And of all of the organizations that we have that could be moving this needle, there's very few that are. And actually, a lot of the organizations that are really bringing men together, Christian men together, are not even connected to a church.
Right.
There's a lot of organizations out here that are moving this needle that are not connected.
But isn't that a good thing?
I think so.
Yeah,
but
too.
I also think that we need to look at it and we need to go, hey, there's room for more.
Yeah.
We haven't tapped out the amount of men that need the resources and need the help that are out there. And it's on all of us to kind of try to move that needle and to try to function in some way, or to try to create some programs, or I don't want to say programs because that sounds really bad, but create opportunities for men to get together.
I agree. And sometimes it's not, I feel like we can get weird about this. I mean, let's go hunting. Let's, have a fire pit night, cigars and whiskey. If you don't drink, cigars and Kool-Aid, I don't know. But it doesn't have to be this every Tuesday at 2:00, I mean, let's just be human and let's create friendships and let's let the Lord lead it and let's him make the center of it. And always the point be he getting the glory. And so I think you and I have settled on the fact that it is a relational solution. The solution is relational.
Yep. We're going to take a brief time out. When we come back, we're going to continue this conversation on the response to all of this wokeness and the deterioration of the man in the United States. So hang with us for 60 seconds.
Full Armor Sports Teams has a new facility for after-school youth programs. It's located at 2380 Montebello near North Academy and Union, with 2 pools for swim lessons and swim teams, a weight room for powerlifting, conditioning, and more. Full Armor Sports Teams is a Christ-centered and family-oriented organization bringing the youth of Colorado Springs together. For more info on after-school and homeschool programs, go to fullarmorsportsteams.com or call 719-629-SWIM.
Welcome back to Faith, Family, Fitness, Freedom on 100.7 The Word. We've had a conversation today about the restoring men in our society. And so far, the point that we've come back to is the fact that this is a relational situation, that we're going to solve this crisis through relationships. And so we've talked about kind of where we believe that's going to start. But once we find, let's say we find our Paul or we find our Timothy, what does that look like in your opinion?
Yeah, I think that you judge a tree by the fruit that it bears. And so I think what that looks like is men living in righteousness, men living with joy, men living with purpose, men leading their families well. Their wives are happy, their children are happy. That doesn't mean they don't have bad days and they don't have challenges, but the divorce rates go down. The suicide rates in our community here in Colorado Springs go down. The substance abuse goes down. The homelessness epidemic reduces. We start seeing measurable metrics in the society start to improve once men find relationship, get discipled, and start looking like little Christ.
Well, and I think that a lot of the larger community has shifted towards this idea of we need to bring back. I just saw in the news, right, in Colorado Springs, this idea of like bringing back the front porch. Just like in our communities, like bringing back the front porch. You know, bringing back that sense of like, hey, you know, we can have face-to-face conversations with people.
Yeah, we need that. We need more of that. I actually was at the gym and I saw something on the TV about how speed dating is up big time. And immediately my thought was, well, that's because of online dating burnout. They're just tired of swiping left or right or whatever. I don't know what direction you swipe in because I met my wife in 2010, but I think that people are yearning for that human connection, the eye contact, the idiosyncrasies of human relationships and conversations in person. Gen Z is the most depressed and the most anxious generation in American history, and they're on social media 24/7. We are a culture crying out for human connection and relationships.
Yeah, and I think it's hard because, right, like you look at more of the philosophical questions that they get brought up by this, and the fact that we can look at it now and say, okay, in the last 25 years, maybe social media, online stuff has a lot to do with where we are today. But some of these issues started far beyond or before the
like
social media stuff. The deterioration of men in the household and all of that started before social media.
Sure.
And so, yeah, we can probably, pin some of it on social media, but what do we have to undo before that? What's the prevalence of it before the social media era that we also have to look at that, maybe it's so easy to pass on by because of the social media?
I think we need a hard reset. So for all the fathers that have young children today, repent and turn to the Lord and start discipling your children at home. I mean, we need a reset that scales across the nation right now. And it starts with me and my son, Abram. I'm going to leave the studio today and I'm going to go pick him up and we're going to go to Sonic, just the two of us, because today is the day that he was born. So every month, he was born on November 11th. Every 11th, Abram and I hang out because I have to be intentional or else I'm going to not have relationship with my son, because as an entrepreneur, and Jason, you relate to this, we're just getting buried every day. Every day we're just reacting. And we live in a hyper distracted culture. We need to be intentional. Put it on your calendar. And that's what I'm doing today.
Yeah, I think it's hard, right? Like we both have our hands in a lot of pots. I teach multiple classes. I teach chemistry. I teach the Sons of Liberty class over at Great American Outpost. I, have my political stuff that I'm doing. We're involved in this show. We've got Full Armor swim and sports teams. And sometimes the attacks just come from everywhere, all at once.
Yeah.
And you have to have people in your corner that you can go back to and have those men in your life that are going to sit there and just listen and give you practical advice or pray with you or pray over you. Because a lot of those attacks are not attacks here on earth, right? Like our war is not with flesh and blood, but with the powers and principalities of the darkness. And that takes a lot of people backing you to fight through some of that stuff, I believe.
You go to war with an army, not by yourself, right?
100%. And God has given us that intentionality and relationship to have that army. But oftentimes we don't use it enough.
Yeah, actually, you brought up Ephesians 6, and in Ephesians 6, verse 4, it says, "Fathers, do not exacerbate your children. Instead, bring them up in training and instruction of the Lord." It's right there. Plain as day.
Yeah, and we've got to do more of that. But I think that there's so many times, right? We say that we want to do more of that. And I think that there's probably a lot of men that listen to the show that go, yeah, I want that. But then they have the question of, where do I start?
Make it intentional. Like I just gave you a very practical example. I'm a very busy, distracted person. Today's the 11th that we're recording this. I'm going to be with my son today because it's the 11th. I have a million things that I need to do. I literally have time-sensitive issues. I have to invoice clients before 3 o'clock. I'm going to be tripping out at 1:30 because I started spending time with my son at 12 when I feel like I should be invoicing to beat the cutoff time. I'm being very practical in my own personal circumstance today to answer that very same question. You start by being intentional. You put it in the calendar. And that is going to look different for everybody else. Maybe not everybody's a calendar person, but the point I'm making is intentionality, making it a priority. If you don't show up to your job, you lose your job, you lose your provision. All these men that are listening to this broadcast would never imagine just not going to their job. They're intentional about going to their job because it's a priority. Prioritize raising your son in the admonition of the Lord. Prioritize being a Paul. Prioritize being a Timothy, and pray about what that looks like in your life.
All right, we're going to take a brief time out. When we come back, we're going to wrap this show up. Hang with us for 60 seconds.
Thanks for listening to Faith Family Fitness, a presentation of Full Armor sports teams. Teamwork is at the core of any successful organization. At Full Armor Sports, led by national champion coach Jason Lupo, a Christ-centered approach to sports fundamentals and fitness has earned his company the respect of athletes and their parents. Full Armor Sports is committed to helping youth in our community experience growth through sports and to strive for improvement and excellence. Further, youth compete as individuals coming together with a sense of teamwork, camaraderie, and support for one another. At Full Armor Sports, the reality is achievements, failures, wins, and losses eventually fade away. But the bonds team members form through competition evolve into relationships lasting forever. Learn more at fullarmorsports.com.
Welcome back to Faith, Family, Fitness, Freedom on 100.7 The Word. Today's topic conversation has been the response and how do we deal with this destruction of masculinity in our country. This is the last show of this 6-part segment that we've been on. So looking back, Aaron, you got about 25 seconds. What are your closing thoughts?
1 Corinthians 16, verse 13, be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. Remember who God created you to be. Men, you were created in the image of the Almighty Creator, who is provider, who's protector, and who is love. It's that simple. Follow Jesus.
Yeah, I think that we as a whole, as a church, as a community, we have to get back to that relational component, and we have to build up our young men that are coming up into this pipeline, that are growing up, and we have to allow them to grow up with this understanding of what it means to be a man biblically and spiritually.
Amen.
Well, we are done with this topic. We've been on it for 6 weeks now. So if you have an idea, if you have a suggestion of where we should go next, reach out to us. Go to faithfamilyfit.org and give us your idea of what you would like for us to talk about next, and we would be happy to cover that on our show. Once again, faithfamilyfit.org. Join us every Saturday at 9 a.m. on 100.7 The Word for Faith, Family, Fitness, Freedom. Thank you. Have a great afternoon.
This has been Faith, Family, Fitness with Coach Jason Lupo of Full Armor Sports Teams of Colorado Springs. Join him at the same time next week for Faith, Family, Fitness on The Word 100.7.